If you let me stay, I can take care of the house. Just don't send me away." The crying started at 2 a.m. Emeka was already awake. He barely ever truly slept since Ada had gone. He lay with his eyes closed, pretending to himself that rest was still something that belonged to him. But his body knew the lie. The body always knows before the head. When the mind still tries to negotiate with exhaustion, the body has already decided it won't yield, that it will stay awake, that it will spend another night reliving things that have no solution at that hour. And when Chinedu let out the first cry, Emeka was already sitting on the edge of the bed, his feet on the cold tiled floor, his heart heavy in that specific way. It felt every early morning, different from the weight of the day, deeper, quieter, harder to explain to those who hadn't experienced it. He got up without turning on the light, not because he was economical with electricity, but because he knew that room by heart. He knew every floor tile that creaked when he stepped a little to the left. He knew the corner of the dresser, where he would stumble if he didn't pay attention. He knew the exact distance from the bed to the door to the corridor to the small room where Chinedu slept. He had learned all this in the last 2 months, ever since he started walking around that house alone, with no one following him to ask if he was well, if he needed anything, if he had eaten properly. Ada always used to follow him. Now, no one did. Chinedu was in the red crib, his fists clenched, his belly rising and falling with the force of the cry coming from that tiny body, with an intensity that seemed impossible for something so new to the world. 3 months. The boy was 3 months old and already seemed to carry some understanding that something was wrong in that house. As if, even without having lived long enough to know the names of things, he felt it in the temperature of the air, in the silence of the early mornings, in the way his father held him with that desperate firmness of someone who knows he cannot let go, because there is no one else to help pick him up. Emeka picked up his son and began to sway, his bare feet on the polished floor, his breathing controlled with effort, because if he lost the rhythm of his breathing in the middle of the night, his son's crying would merge with something inside him that he didn't want to let out. He had learned to control it. It was one of the practical things he had learned since being alone. Control his breathing, control his voice, control his face, because Amara saw. Amara always saw. "I'm here," he said in a low voice, his face close to his son's face. "I'm here, my son. I'm here." It was all he knew how to say in those hours, and most of the time it was enough, because Chinedu seemed to respond to his father's voice in a way that confirmed what Emeka sometimes thought, that small children don't need answers. They need presence. They need to know that when they call, someone comes, that the dark is not empty. From the corridor came the sound of tiny footsteps that he knew. The door opened slowly, with that care of someone who doesn't want to make noise, but did. And Amara appeared in the doorway, her hair disheveled in all directions, her eyes half closed with sleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, the rabbit Ada had bought at the last local festival in town, on a Saturday in December, laughing as she argued with the vendor about the price and, in the end, paying what the vendor asked, because she had looked at Amara looking at the toy, and couldn't bear to leave without it. Emeka knew this because he had been there. He knew many things because he had been there, and now, many things were happening without him being there. "Papa," Amara said with that thick, sleepy voice. "Chinedu is crying again." "I know, my daughter. You can go back to sleep. You don't need to wake up. I hear him even from there," she said, without moving from the doorway, as if waiting for a tacit permission no one had formally given. Emeka looked at her for a moment. 5 years old, coily hair just like Ada's. That specific texture he had learned to comb with the right shea butter, in the right order, because otherwise it would get all tangled. Amara used to cry, and he would be desperate in the bathroom with the comb in his hand, not knowing what he was doing wrong. The same deep-set eyes Ada had when she worried about something and didn't want to talk about it. That look that holds more than it reveals. Amara had stopped asking constant questions about her mother. At first, she asked every day. Emeka answered as best he could that Mummy had gone to a faraway place, that she was well, that she looked after them from where she was, that she missed them, just like they missed her. Amara listened, processing it with that childlike seriousness that doesn't know that certain questions tear you apart. And the next day she would ask again, as if every answer he gave was good for 24 hours and then needed to be renewed. Now she didn't ask as much. Emeka didn't know whether to be relieved or more worried about it. "Come here," he said. Amara entered the room and leaned against her father's legs, with that absolute childlike trust that knows that body is safe. Emeka stood in the middle of the dark room, with his son in his arms, growing heavy, and his daughter leaning on him, also heavy. But in a different way, the three of them in the dark, while the wind rattled the old wooden window in stronger gusts, and the homestead slept outside with that enormous indifference nature has for people's pain. Nature doesn't stop. The grass keeps growing, the cattle keep existing, the sun will rise in the same place, and Emeka had always found that comforting. Now, sometimes, he found it cruel. Chinedu gradually calmed down. His crying lessened in volume. The tension in his fists eased. His breathing became slower. Amara fell asleep standing, leaning against her father. Emeka stayed there for a while longer, unable to move, unwilling to move. Because when the children were sleeping near him like that, there was that specific feeling that the world had contracted to a manageable size, that everything that mattered was there, in that small circle of three bodies in the dark room. Afterwards, the feeling passed, and the room became big again. In the morning, the homestead woke before him. The chickens clucked loudly in the compound, complaining about the gate that had been left closed. The dog, Pakato, a name that didn't match anything the animal did, barked at something only he saw, probably his own reflection in the water bowl. The wind came from the hill behind the house and swayed the leaves of the mango tree Ada had planted 4 years ago. On an October afternoon, with his hoe, because hers had broken, laughing as she dug the hole bigger than it needed to be. "You're digging a grave," he had said. "Mango roots need space," she had replied without stopping. "Where did you get that from?" "From my head, but it sounds true, doesn't it?" The tree was growing. She wasn't. Emeka made strong coffee, heated milk for Amara, warmed Chinedu's baby bottle in a double boiler, because the microwave had broken the previous month, and fixing it had joined the list of things he still hadn't managed to resolve. The list was long. The list grew faster than it shrank. He tried to handle everything at once. While Amara asked for honey in her milk, Chinedu decided that this was exactly the time to be urgently hungry, and the pot of beans he had forgotten on the stove smelled burnt. There were farmhands on the homestead, Babadapo, the oldest and most reliable, who had worked with Emeka's father before working with him. Jaid, the youngest, 22 years old, strong, but still learning. Chidi, the middle one, quiet, efficient, the type who gets the job done without you needing to repeat yourself. They took care of the cattle, the fence, the milking, the pastures, but none of them entered the house. It was an unspoken boundary, but one everyone respected. The division between what belonged to the farm and what belonged to the home. And the home was Emeka's responsibility. He had tried to hire a woman from town to help, an elderly woman named Mama Ngozi, whom the neighbor had enthusiastically recommended, saying she was the best, hard-working, honest, a good cook. Mama Ngozi had arrived one Monday morning, assessed the situation, put on her apron, and worked competently for 6 days. On the 7th day, a Friday, she sat on the kitchen stool with a tired face and said, "Sir Emeka, you are a good man, but this homestead is too far. This baby cries more than I can handle, and I have my own house that needs me. I cannot stay." Emeka had paid for the days without complaining, and she had left. He was alone again. The house became disorganized not overnight, but in that silent, gradual way things decay when no one has enough energy to keep them in place. The sink accumulated dishes because after taking care of the children, washing dishes seemed the least of his priorities. Clothes lay on the chair instead of going into the wardrobe, because folding and putting them away required another 5 minutes he didn't have. The floor was swept only when the situation became unbearable. The living room window still had the broken pane that the wind had shattered 3 weeks earlier, covered with a plastic sheet Emeka had temporarily put up, and which had stayed. That specific day, a Wednesday in May, with that sun that already threatened the dry season cold of the savannah, he was on the veranda with Chinedu in his arms, and Amara playing on the steps with the set of plastic animals her godfather had given her for Christmas, when he heard the sound of footsteps coming down the dirt path. Footsteps on foot. Neighbors arrived on motorbikes or in pickup trucks. Delivery men arrived on motorbikes. Vendors in cars. No one arrived on foot on that path that stretched for kilometers to the main road. Emeka frowned and looked. It was a woman. She came slowly down the dirt path, with that specific gait of someone whose feet hurt, but who won't stop, because stopping means not having arrived, and arriving was still the goal. She carried a small leather bag, darkened by use, its strap on her shoulder. Her clothes were simple, a dark blouse, fabric trousers, slippers that were not suitable for the walk. Her dark hair was tied back, but loose in parts, like hair that had been combed early in the morning, and spent hours in the wind since then. She reached the homestead gate and stopped. She stood looking at him. Emeka stood looking at her. Amara dropped the plastic horse and looked too. Chinedu, for some inexplicable reason that babies have, stopped moving. The woman's eyes swept over the veranda with that calm attention of someone assessing a situation without haste. She saw the baby in Emeka's arms. She saw the girl on the steps with the toy in her hand. She saw the clothes carelessly hung on the clothesline beside the house. She saw the dishes visible through the open kitchen window. She saw the plastic on the broken window. She saw the tiredness Emeka carried on his face, in his shoulders, in his very posture, with that clarity with which deep exhaustion becomes visible to those who know how to recognize it because they have lived it. And then she said in a low voice, without circumlocution, without preamble, without the story that usually comes before a request, explaining and justifying and trying to convince, she said directly, like someone who had reached the point where embellishing words no longer made a difference. If you let me stay, I can take care of the house. Just don't send me away. The silence that followed was one of those that had weight. Chinedu stirred. Amara squeezed the plastic horse in her hand, and Emeka stood looking at that woman at the gate, with her bag beside her, and a gaze that wasn't pleading, but of someone who had reached their limit and decided to be completely honest about it. Emeka Okoro was 38 years old and had learned early from his father, Chief Obi Okoro, a man of few words and much land, that impulsive decisions carried a high cost, that a fence built in a hurry gives way in the first storm, that a cow bought in the enthusiasm of the market, without properly checking its health, was a sure loss, that a farmhand hired without references disappears with a week's wages. He had applied this philosophy to everything, to cattle, to farming, to people. There was a bitter irony in the fact that the most impulsive decision of his adult life had been the best one he ever made. He had met Ada on a Wednesday in October at a local festival in town and proposed courtship on Thursday. She had laughed and said he needed at least a week to propose courtship or she would think he was impulsive. He waited exactly 1 week. 2 years later they were married. 5 years later they were expecting Amara. 10 years later she was pregnant with Chinedu, and they were planning to extend the veranda for more space in the summer. 10.5 years later she was gone, and he was alone with 2 children and a homestead and a tiredness that no longer had a sufficient name. So, when the woman at the gate said that, he should have thought carefully. He should have asked the right questions first. He should have been the Emeka his father had taught him to be. Instead, he looked at her for a time that should have been for reflection, but was, in fact, for recognition. Recognition of something he couldn't quite explain if he tried, but which was there. The look of someone who had reached the end of something and wasn't asking for a favor, but was offering everything she had, which wasn't much, but was real. "What's your name?" he asked. "Neka," she said. "Neka Okoro. Where do you come from?" "From Ilesha, a town about 60 kilometers from here." "How did you get here?" "Mostly on foot. A lorry ride to the asphalt junction. The rest on foot." He looked at her feet. The slippers were thin rubber, the kind not made for a dirt road. They were covered in red dust up to her ankles. "Do you have family?" he asked. The pause was minimal, but it was there. "No," she said. And the way she said it was a closed door, not angrily locked, but closed with the care of someone who had put heavy things behind it and didn't want them to fall. Emeka looked at Chinedu. The boy had miraculously closed his eyes, quieted for some reason known only to God and babies. He looked at Amara, who was still observing the woman with that childlike seriousness that doesn't know it's being imposing. He thought of the beans that had burnt the morning before, because Chinedu cried while he was at the stove, and he had to choose. He thought of Amara's uniform, which had been left unwashed in the basket because he had forgotten. He thought of the 3 consecutive nights he had slept less than 4 hours, and still had an entire homestead to manage when the sun rose. "Come in," he said. She opened the gate slowly and entered, and life on the Ogbomosho homestead began to change, although neither of them knew yet where. The first night was strange in the way every new presence is strange when you are accustomed to absence. Emeka showed her the guest room, a small room at the back of the house, with a window overlooking the backyard, where the avocado tree grew unsolicited, with a single bed, an old but clean mattress, because Ada had had the covers of all the mattresses washed in one of her last months, one of her periodic organizing rituals that Emeka had continued doing out of inertia, because not knowing what to do with the habits of someone who is gone is one of the quietest ways to miss them. Neka placed her bag under the bed and looked around without commenting on the size or simplicity. "The bathroom is down the corridor," Emeka said. "You share it with Amara, but she sleeps early, and in the morning you use it first. If you need to, there's no problem sharing. The kitchen is free, if you need water or anything." "Thank you." He was leaving, and she said, "Sir Emeka." He turned around. "Tomorrow morning, sir, you tell me what you need me to do first. I don't know how the house works yet, so I prefer you guide me, rather than me trying to guess and doing it wrong." He looked at her for a second. There was something in that sentence he didn't expect. It wasn't staged humility. It was genuine pragmatism. She wasn't trying to impress. She was being efficient. "All right," he said. "Good night." "Good night." He left and closed the door. Amara was waiting in the corridor. "Is she staying?" the girl asked in a low voice. "For now," Emeka said. "Why for now?" "Because it's too early to know more than that." Amara considered this seriously. "She seems good," the girl said. "You barely spoke to her, but her eyes seem good. Mummy used to say eyes don't lie." Emeka stood still for a second with that. "Go to sleep, Amara." The girl went, and Emeka stood in the corridor for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house, the wind, the cricket outside, and that new sound of someone moving in the back room, which was the sound of a presence that hadn't been there the night before. The next morning, Emeka woke up to the smell of coffee. This hadn't happened in 2 months. For 2 months, he had been the first to wake up, the one who made the coffee and waited for the day to begin alone in the kitchen, with the exhaustion of the previous night and the weight of the day that was starting. That smell of coffee ready before he even reached the kitchen made him feel something he wasn't prepared for. He stood at the kitchen entrance. Nneka was facing away from him, stirring something on the stove. Chinedu's baby bottle was warming in the double boiler. The table was clean, which was not the state he had left it in the night before. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied without turning. "Coffee is ready. Amara's milk is warm. Bread is on the table. I don't know how the young madam takes hers. I left it without honey for now." "With honey," he said. "All right. Honey is in the cupboard. I saw it yesterday." She went to the baby bottle, tested the temperature on her wrist with that automatic gesture of someone who had done it many times before for a child who was no longer there, and adjusted the heat. Emeka went to sit. The coffee was strong, just right. The bread was sliced. There was a small detail of order on the table, which wasn't a big deal, but it made the place feel different. When Amara appeared with her sleepy hair, Nneka already had her milk with honey separated. "Good morning," Nneka said to the girl. "Good morning," Amara said, assessing the situation with her eyes still half closed. "Did you sleep?" "I did. The back room is cold at night. I saw, but I brought a blanket." Amara considered this satisfactory and went to sit and drink her milk. Emeka sat looking at the table and tried to understand what he was feeling. It wasn't joy. It was too early for joy. It wasn't discomfort, because her presence didn't cause discomfort. It was something closer to relief and guilt at the same time. The relief of having help and the guilt of feeling relief when there was a reason for the help to be necessary. He drank his coffee without resolving this, and the day began. Nneka had asked for guidance, and he had given it, but after 2 days he realized she didn't need much guidance. She had the instinct of someone who grew up working, who looks at a kitchen and knows its logic without needing explanations, who notices where the broom is by the wear on the floor, who understands the order of things by how they are organized. There was a discrete competence in her that didn't announce itself. She didn't come saying she knew how to do things. She simply did them, and she did them well. With that unostentatious efficiency of someone who learned to work in an environment where doing well was an obligation, not a merit. The food was the first thing Amara truly noticed. On the third night, Nneka made jollof rice with chicken and okra soup, simple, without any pretension. Amara ate everything, which in itself wasn't extraordinary, but there was something in the way she ate with attention, as if savoring each mouthful, that made Emeka notice. In the end, Amara looked at her empty plate and said in that direct way she had, "It tastes like mummy's food." Nneka remained quiet. Emeka remained quiet. There was a knife in that sentence that neither of them had expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so completely honest that there was no way not to feel it. "You think so?" Nneka said after a moment, with a careful voice. "It has the same smell," Amara said. "The smell of home when mummy cooked." Emeka got up from the table with the plates and went to the sink. He washed the dishes with that exaggerated attention of someone using the activity as a place to put his eyes while the emotion passed. Nneka went to help without being called. They stood at the sink, side by side, washing in silence, while Amara went to her room with her stuffed rabbit. Neither of them said anything about what the girl had said, but both had heard. With Chinedu, Nneka had established a routine that the boy adopted with a speed that surprised Emeka. It was the ritual of the bath before dark, the water temperature in the exact order, the talcum powder in the folds of his neck where irritation appeared, the lullaby she sang while drying him a lullaby. Emeka didn't know, which she sang softly with that voice of someone using music as she would use her hands to do something concrete in the world. Chinedu looked at her during the bath with that intense concentration of a baby processing a face with all available senses, and stretched out his hand, took her finger, and squeezed. One afternoon, Emeka passed the open door of the small room and saw Nneka with Chinedu in her arms, the boy slowly falling asleep as she swayed him, looking out the window with an expression he couldn't quite classify. It wasn't sadness. It was something closer to that specific mixture of present and absent that happens when you are doing something good, and at the same time, remembering something that hurt. He didn't enter. He stood on the threshold for a second and left, but he held onto that image in a way he couldn't explain. The neighbor, Chief Adekunle, appeared in the first week. Chief Adekunle had the homestead that bordered Emeka's on the east side, in the section that followed the Stony Stream for about 3 kilometers. Good land, with easy water, Land Chief Adekunle had tried to buy from Emeka's father, then tried to buy from Emeka himself, with offers that increased each time Emeka said no, as if a higher price would eventually convince where persuasion failed. He was the kind of neighbor you needed to keep a calculated distance from, close enough not to create unnecessary enmity, far enough not to give an opening. He arrived in his pickup truck, broad and smiling, just as he was. He threw his cap on the veranda chair like someone who already lived there, and went straight to the point after 2 minutes of small talk about the weather. "I heard you brought a woman to the house. I hired someone to help." "Yes, small towns," Chief Adekunle said with that smile that didn't reach his eyes. "News travels fast. Nobody is judging you, Emeka. You need help. Anyone understands. With 2 small children and the homestead, it's natural." Emeka remained quiet. "Just be careful," Chief Adekunle said, changing his tone to that of a concerned friend, which is the most dangerous kind. "You don't know where this woman came from. People without references, without family, who appear uninvited. She might be a good person, she might not. And you have 2 small children, Emeka, and a homestead, and a heart that has lost so much." "Thank you very much for your concern," Emeka said, "but also to renew our conversation about the lower part of your land." "The answer is still no, Chief Adekunle." Chief Adekunle put his cap back on calmly. "You will need money. Children grow, expenses grow. The cattle market isn't easy this year." He descended the veranda steps with that slow gait of someone who isn't in a hurry because he will return. "When you truly want to talk, you know where to find me." The pickup truck left. From the kitchen window, Nneka had heard most of it. When Emeka entered, she was facing away, peeling cassava. "That man is interested in your land," she said without turning. "He is. He has been for years, and he's interested in making you feel vulnerable enough to sell." Emeka stopped. "How do you know that?" "Because his speech wasn't about concern. It was about weakening you." She turned to him, knife in hand. "First, he says you need help. Then he says the person who came to help might be dangerous. Then he reminds you that you have children and that you are vulnerable." She turned back to the cassava. "That's not friendship, it's strategy." Emeka stood looking at her for a moment. "You are observant." "I learned to observe," she said simply. "Sometimes it's the only defense we have." He stood for a moment in the kitchen. "That analysis you made?" he said. "You said that about Chief Adekunle, but you could be talking about yourself." She didn't answer immediately. "Could I?" she admitted without stopping peeling. "The difference is, I don't want anything that is yours. Only the place he is trying to convince you to take me from." Emeka held on to that thought and went to wash his hands, watching the water run for longer than necessary. In the second week, Amara began to follow Nneka like a shadow. It wasn't the immediate, exaggerated attachment of a child who has already found a replacement. It was something more gradual, more honest. Amara had been observing for days before starting to approach. She had tested Nneka's presence, like someone testing the ground before stepping, looking for where it yields, where it is firm. Nneka had allowed herself to be tested without forcing anything. She hadn't tried to win the girl over with sweets or exaggerated attention. She had simply gone about her daily tasks and let Amara decide when she wanted to get closer. And Amara had decided. First, she stayed close without participating, just watching. Then she started asking questions. Why this spice before that one? Why does the dough need to rest? Why do you put salt in the pasta water? Nneka answered each question seriously, like someone who understands that a child who asks deserves a real answer. Why salt in the water? Because pasta without salt in the water tastes bland, even if you add sauce later. The salt goes inside when it cooks. and you can't put it inside afterwards. You can always adjust the outside. Inside is for good. Amara thought about that. Like people, she said after Neka paused with the spoon in her hand. How so? That what goes inside goes for good. Neka looked at the 5-year-old girl in her oversized striped apron and felt that thing in her chest that only children can provoke, which is the impact of a wisdom that shouldn't fit that age. You are very smart, Neka said. My mummy used to say I was too smart for my own good, Amara said with a naturalness that held no sadness, only memory. Your mummy was right. Did you know her? No. But do you believe me that she was right when she said that? I believe it because I am seeing it. Amara seemed satisfied with this and returned her attention to the dough, and Neka was silent for a while, processing that conversation with that specific weight children unknowingly place on things. There was one thing Emeka had avoided doing since Ada left. He had avoided entering her room. The wardrobe was intact, her clothes, the perfume bottles on the dresser. The small box of earrings she rarely wore, but never threw away. The book she had stopped reading on chapter 12, with a chewing gum wrapper serving as a bookmark. He slept in the same room, but had created an internal geography that kept him on his side, in his wardrobe, in his part of the dresser. Her side was territory he hadn't found the courage to reorganize. One night, 3 weeks after Neka's arrival, he was in the room and looked at Ada's side with that sharp clarity that tiredness sometimes brings. He thought, she's not coming back. He thought, I know that. He thought, then why am I preserving a museum? There was no simple answer to this. The complicated answer was that organizing her things meant finally accepting that she no longer needed them, and accepting that in a final way was unnecessarily concrete for a grief that still preferred to be nebulous. He closed his eyes, opened them again, and began. Not everything, not that night, but he began. He took the book from the dresser and placed it on the bookshelf in the living room, because a book deserves a shelf, not a drawer. He put the earrings back in their small box and placed it in the bottom drawer. He left the perfumes because he wasn't ready for the scent yet. When he finished that little bit, he was sweating, as if he had done heavy labor. He left the room. Neka was in the living room folding clothes. She looked up, saw his state, and didn't ask. Want coffee? She said. I do. She went to make the coffee. He went to sit at the kitchen table, and they remained in silence while the kettle boiled, and the silence was the kind that needed no explanation. She brought the coffee. Thank you, he said. No problem, she said, and went back to the clothes. The rain started on a Thursday afternoon and didn't stop. In the savannah interior, 3 consecutive days of rain isn't a metaphor for anything. It's literally 3 days of water falling without enough pause to let the earth drink it all. The dirt path leading to the homestead turned into thick mud, where not even Baba Dapo's tractor ventured without risk. The roads to town were practically closed, because no one risked their car. The entire world of the homestead contracted to that piece of land and that house. And inside that house were Emeka, Neka, Amara, and Chinedu. Plus Bakato, the dog, who had been afraid of the thunder on the first night and found a crack in the pantry window and entered uninvited, settling under the kitchen table, with a conviction that made his removal inconvenient. Emeka had looked at the dog under the table and decided there were more important battles. The first day was peaceful with that forced tranquility of someone still adjusting to confinement. Neka made light chicken pepper soup with vegetables, the kind of soup that smells of rain and seems made exactly for days like these. Amara stayed at the window watching the rain fall in the compound, with that childish fascination that hasn't tired of rain yet. Chinedu slept more than usual, lulled by the constant sound of water on the zinc roof. In the afternoon, Amara asked for a story. Neka, tell a story. Emeka was expecting Neka to say she didn't know how to tell stories, or that she wasn't good at it, or that Amara should ask her father. Instead, Neka sat on the sofa, pulled Amara close, and began. It was a story about a leopard that had lost its way back to the river where it drank water, and a tortoise that knew the way but was afraid of being eaten if it told the leopard. The story had internal logic, real tension, and characters who acted according to who they were. The leopard wasn't a villain, it was a hungry animal. The tortoise wasn't a coward, it was an animal with reasonable fear. The resolution wasn't magical, it was a negotiation. The tortoise agreed to guide the leopard in exchange for protection during the crossing of the open bush, where the tortoise was vulnerable. Amara watched without blinking. In the end, tell another. Neka told another. This time it was the story of an eagle that had adopted a duckling because its nest was empty when it returned from a long journey. and how that duckling grew up believing it could fly high, and the honest confusion that caused when it came time to discover it couldn't. Did the eagle lie to him? Amara asked. The eagle didn't lie. It let him believe, because believing was doing him good. But when he found out he couldn't fly like an eagle, he was sad, Neka said. But then he realized he could swim better than any eagle. And the eagle couldn't swim. So, they both had something the other didn't have. Amara thought about it. So, is it good to be different? It's good to know who you really are, Neka said, even if it takes a while to find out. Emeka was in the corner chair pretending to read an account book and had stopped pretending some time ago. He was listening, and Neka's sentence resonated with him in a way she clearly hadn't intended for him, but it reached him. On the second day of rain, Baba Dapo appeared in the kitchen even before breakfast. He came from the shed where he had slept, drenched even with his poncho. His muddy boots stopped at the threshold, his cap in his hand dripping. "Good morning, Baba Dapo," said Neka, who was at the stove. He didn't answer. He stood looking at her with that direct assessment of someone who hasn't learned to disguise what they think. Emeka entered shortly after. "Baba Dapo, what is it?" "I came to speak with you, sir." A pause. Alone, Neka picked up Chinedu's baby bottle, which had finished warming, and left without saying anything, with that quiet step of someone who learned to exit environments without making noise. Baba Dapo waited for the sound of her footsteps to fade down the corridor. "That woman has a history, Emeka," he said. "I know that. I don't know if you know what kind of history. Say what you came to say, Baba Dapo." The old man took a step closer, lowering his voice not out of secrecy, but from the habit of someone who speaks serious things this way. "I went to Mama Uche's provision shop yesterday to get some tobacco before the rain closed everything. There were 2 men there who weren't from around here. Car with an Abuja plate number asking about a woman. The description was hers. Emeka. Dark hair, middle-aged, leather bag, arrived on foot from the main road." Emeka remained quiet. "What did you say?" "I didn't say anything. I pretended I didn't know anyone like that." Baba Dapo put his wet cap back on his head. "But Mama Uche has a loose tongue, and those men asked other people too. Someone will talk." "Thank you, Baba Dapo. I'm not telling you to send her away," the old man said with that honesty. That was the reason Emeka trusted him. "I'm telling you that you need to know what has come into your house, because of the children." Baba Dapo left. Emeka stood in the kitchen for a moment, went to the corridor, and knocked on Neka's room door. She opened it, holding Chinedu in her arms, who was seriously drinking his bottle. "We need to talk," Emeka said. She looked at his face and knew it wasn't a routine conversation. "Let me put him in his crib." They sat at the kitchen table with the rain beating on the roof above. Amara was in her room. Pakato was sleeping under the table. "People are looking for you," Emeka said. She showed no surprise. That was what he noticed first. 2 men were at the shop yesterday, Abuja plate number. Neka looked at her hands on the table for a moment. "I knew it wouldn't take long," she said. "Who are they?" She breathed slowly. "They work for my brother-in-law, Emeka." He remained quiet, waiting. "My sister, Ifeoma, married a man named Chief Obina Ekweme, a big farmer from Enugu. Big money, a name that opens doors and closes mouths." She paused. "After my mother died, I had nowhere to go. I went to live with them. I worked for years, cooked, washed, cleaned the house. I was the labor the house needed, and they paid me little because I was family." "And what happened for you to leave like that?" She raised her eyes. There was a decision there, to be completely honest. And Emeka recognized it because he had seen that decision once before, at the homestead gate, the day she arrived. "Chief Obina Ekweme," she said slowly, "is not a man who respects boundaries." A pause. "My sister didn't believe me. She prefers the version that doesn't destroy what she has built. So, I left because staying was worse than leaving." "He did something to you?" "He tried," she said with a firmness that needed no details to be completely understood. "More than once. I resisted, and the reaction of someone who resists that kind of man is what you are seeing now. He's looking for me because he doesn't accept that I left." Emeka remained very quiet for a while. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "I did." She said this without bitterness, with that tone of factual report, which is itself the saddest way to tell a story. "A policewoman took down the details, said she would investigate. When I went back 2 days later, they told me Chief Obina had appeared and declared that I was an employee, that I had left without notice, taking money from the house. And you had taken it?" "I had taken what was owed to me for years of work, which was never properly paid. A small amount I saved over time." She looked at him. With his money on his side, that turned into theft. A long silence. The rain. Pakato stirred under the table and became quiet again. You have no way to prove it wasn't theft, Emeka said. I have no way to prove most of the things that happened, she said simply. It's the condition of those without power. Emeka looked at her. Now I know. He looked at her directly, and the answer remains the same. Nneka lowered her eyes. The tear that fell, she quickly wiped away with the back of her hand, with that movement of someone ashamed to be seen feeling. From the living room, Amara hummed softly to her plastic animals, and the rain continued for 2 more days. On the 3rd day, when the sun returned with that compensatory force of Savannah sun after rain, Nneka washed all the clothes in the house at once, in a big washing effort that started early and lasted until mid-afternoon. She hung everything on the clothesline and stood looking at the clothes, swaying in the wind, with that specific satisfaction that laundry washed on a strong sunny day brings, the smell of clean and wind combined. Amara ran through the wet compound barefoot. Put on your slippers, Nneka said. Is it bad to walk barefoot? No, it's not. But we wear slippers out of respect. For whom? For the earth. You walk on it all day. It's good manners to show respect. Amara went to get her slippers without further question. Emeka, who had heard this from the shed, stood still for a second. It had been a long time since he had heard that kind of explanation, the kind that teaches not just what, but why. Ada used to do that, and there was something in Nneka's way that resonated with what Ada had, not because they were similar, but because they shared that conviction that a child deserves an explanation, not just an order. That night, after the children were asleep, Emeka went to the veranda. Nneka was already there, sitting in the rocking chair, looking at the sky that the rain had washed clean, full of stars, with that clarity of the interior that city dwellers never see. He sat on the chair beside her. They remained in silence for a while. Are you afraid? He asked. Of what specifically? Of them finding you. She thought deeply before answering, not with a quick answer that dismisses the question. I'm afraid of what he can fabricate, she said. I'm afraid of not being believed. That's the fear that doesn't pass, or that his lie will be bigger than my truth. Here you have a witness. I know. She looked at the sky. But you have never lived through what it's like when someone else's narrative erases yours. When you speak the truth, and the voice that speaks the lie is louder, more trusted, has more names behind it. I haven't lived it, he admitted, but I can imagine. Not entirely, she said, without cruelty, just with precision. But I appreciate that you try. They fell silent again. Are you staying? He said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him. I am, she said, and it was a promise they both felt as such. June arrived with the harmattan cold of early mornings. That dry savannah cold, which is not the humid mountain cold, it's another kind that dries the lips and catches the throat and makes breath come out like smoke at sunrise. Nneka had learned this in the first week, and now she woke before the rooster to light the wood-burning stove in the kitchen, so that when the children woke up, the house already had that inner warmth that is different from heater warmth. It's house warmth, organic and fragrant. Emeka would arrive in the kitchen and find the coffee brewed and Nneka out on the back veranda with a cup of tea, looking at the field with that expression of someone who is alone on purpose for a few minutes. He had learned this about her. That morning time was her time, those 15, 20 minutes before everyone woke up, when she stood still, looking at the field and thinking about what she thought when no one was looking. He didn't interrupt. He took his coffee, stayed in the kitchen, waited for her to come in when she was ready. It was a form of respect that had emerged without agreement, from the observation that she needed it and that offering it was the right thing to do. Amara had blossomed. Baba Dapo had used that word one morning, in a conversation with Jeed, about the general state of the homestead, without wanting to be poetic, simply describing what he saw in the same way he would describe the behavior of a calf. The girl has blossomed, he had said. Jeed had agreed without fully understanding the weight of the observation. Emeka had heard and remained quiet with the exactness of the word. Amara had been, since Ada's death, in a state Emeka would describe as withdrawn, if he needed a word, not sad in a dramatic sense. 5-year-old. Children don't get sad in an adult sense, but there was a different quality about her, a seriousness that weighed, a silence that came at the wrong time, an economy of joy that made it feel like she was rationing something. Now she laughed. Not all the time, not with that lightness of an advertisement, but truly laughed at the right times, with that laughter that comes from a real place, from when something genuinely touches her sense of humor. She laughed when Nneka said something that wasn't intended to be funny, but was. She laughed when Chinedu made a face of someone too concentrated on eating. She laughed when Pakato tried to reach the bone Jeed had placed too high, and the dog looked at the bone with that expression of injustice. and she had gone back to playing with an investment that had been missing for a while. One June afternoon, Amara went to Neka with her set of plastic animals and said, "Help me make a real homestead for them." "How so?" "A real homestead, with a fence and everything." Neka looked at the plastic animals for a second. "You need sticks, twine, and a little bit of earth," she said. "I have all of that." "Then let's go." They went to the backyard. Neka asked for the materials. Amara ran to get them. They made a small fence, with sticks planted in the earth, and twine strung between them. They divided it into paddocks, separated the animals by type like a real homestead. "The cattle go here," Neka said. "Pigs go in a separate pen, because pigs and cattle don't mix well." "Why not?" "Because they have different needs, and the pigs disturb the cattle. Pigs are bothersome, pigs are pigs. Each has its own nature." Emeka had passed by and seen the two of them on the backyard ground, with the plastic homestead fenced with sticks between them, the afternoon sun overhead, Neka explaining the workings of a cattle pen to a 5-year-old child with the same seriousness she would explain it to an adult. He stood at the door for a long time. There was one afternoon Emeka held on to differently. He had returned from the pasture earlier because the paddock gate had given him trouble and he had fixed it sooner than expected. He entered through the side of the house, passed through the corridor that led to the living room, and heard Amara's voice before arriving. "Do you miss anyone?" the girl was asking. "I do," Neka said. "Who?" A pause. "My mother," Neka said. "It's been many years since she went, but I still miss her." "My mummy went not long ago," Amara said. "But it already feels like a long time. The time of longing is different from clock time." "How so?" "A minute of longing can feel like a day. A year of longing can feel like a week when you're busy remembering good things." Amara was silent for a moment. "Do you think my mummy is watching us?" "I think so." "Why do you think so?" "Because people who truly love don't know how to stop." Silence. Emeka stood still in the corridor, unmoving. "Neka," Amara said. "What?" "Do you like living here?" "Idu." "Are you staying for a long time?" "I hope so." "I hope so too," the girl said with that seriousness she had. "Because when you're here, the house feels different. Different like. It feels full." Amara paused. "When Mummy went, the house felt empty even with us inside. With you here, it feels full again, but different from before. Not the same, just full." Emeka leaned his hand against the corridor wall, stood like that for a moment, then went to the bathroom, washed his face with cold water, and stood looking at the mirror for a time he couldn't measure. There was a notebook Emeka used for accounts, for his agenda, for vaccine schedules, but also for other things. Since Ada had gone, in moments when the silence grew too big and he needed to put something somewhere. That night he opened the notebook and stared at the blank page for a while. Then he wrote, "Today I heard Amara say the house felt full again. I stood in the corridor listening. I don't know if I should have listened, but I did, and I don't regret it." He paused. He wrote more. "Ada, you would have liked her, not in the way you think, but in the way one person likes another person, who takes care of things with the same kind of attention you had. She is not you. Nothing in her is you. But there is something in her that reminds me that people like this exist, that there are people who take care of things and people, just as the sea ebbs and flows, without needing a reason beyond its own nature." He closed the notebook, stared at the ceiling, knew there was something growing inside him that he hadn't planned and hadn't asked for. And he also knew there was nothing he could do about it, other than recognize that it was there. In July, Chief Ade Kunle returned with reinforcements. This time, he brought a barrister named Barrister Okoro, the kind who wears a suit in any temperature, because the suit is part of the strategy. A man with a briefcase and a calibrated smile. Emeka received them in the living room. Neka remained in the kitchen with the door ajar. Barrister Okoro opened his briefcase and placed papers on the table with the care of someone presenting a gift. "Mr. Emeka Okoro, my client has a formal interest in acquiring 32 hectares on the eastern margin of your property, specifically the strip that runs along the Stony Stream. The updated offer is, I'm not selling. It would be prudent to consider the value before refusing. Mr. Okoro, you have 2 young children." The barrister continued with that professional patience of someone trained not to be perturbed by rejection. "Managing a homestead under these conditions represents a considerable challenge. The amount offered would allow—" "Are you telling me I can't cope?" Emeka said. "By no means. I am merely suggesting that an injection of capital at this moment—" "Enough." Emeka stood up. "This homestead is mine. The land my father left me has no price that you will bring in that briefcase." He walked to the door and opened it. "The visit is over." Barrister Okoro gathered his papers without haste. Chief Adekunle stood up, put on his cap. You will regret being stubborn, Emeka. This, I'm telling you as a neighbor. Thank you for the warning, Emeka said. The pickup truck left. Nneka came out of the kitchen. He won't stop, she said. He won't stop. You need to regularize the land documentation with someone from outside. A barrister who owes nothing to Chief Adekunle. You're right. I've heard that before. From whom? From you. Weeks ago. She looked at him. And why haven't you done it yet? Because I'd have to go to the big city, Lagos. 100 kilometers away. 100 kilometers is not a distance. It's a day's journey with 2 small children and a homestead that needs me. The children can stay here. Baba Dapo can look after the homestead. You go and sort this out. Emeka looked at her. There was a firmness in her that wasn't demanding. It was practical. She wasn't trying to boss him around. She was solving a problem aloud. Are you giving me orders? He asked. I'm giving advice. You can ignore it, if you prefer. She turned back to the kitchen, but she shouldn't have. He stood still for a moment and then, for the first time in a long time, he found amusement. Not a sound of laughter. Just that movement at the corner of his mouth. That is the minimal version of a smile on a face that had forgotten their geometry. He made arrangements for the trip to Lagos the following week. The trip yielded what it needed to. Emeka returned with a hired barrister. Barrister Emeka, a tall and methodical man who had spent 2 hours examining the homestead documents and identified 3 points where the documentation was imprecise, not fraudulent, but with a margin of ambiguity that an opposing lawyer could exploit. This type of inaccuracy, Barrister Emeka had said, is exactly what someone with an interest in the land will use as an argument in any future dispute. We need to regularize. They had started the process. When Emeka returned and told her, Nneka listened, asked a technical question about the stream issue, which showed she had listened more than it seemed when he explained the lands to her that afternoon in the field. And then she said, "Good, that's all," and went to the stove. But there was a very contained satisfaction in that good, and Emeka had noticed. August arrived with the heat of the dry season, and with it came what Nneka had feared. August in the savannah is the unforgiving month. The earth cracks into fissures that look like maps of nowhere. Dust rises with any wind and settles on everything. The grass yellows with a rapidity that makes the farmer check the pasture twice a day. People become more irritable, harsher, as if the dry air took away not only moisture but patience too. And it was in this month that Ifeoma Okoro arrived. Nneka was in the backyard hanging dishcloths when the white car stopped on the road, and Ifeoma got out. The two looked at each other for a second that contained 10 years of history. Ifeoma had Nneka's face, but with another life on it. A life of comfort that had done specific things to her face, left it softer on the cheeks, tenser around the eyes. The kind of tension that comes from maintaining appearances instead of simply living. You disappeared, Ifeoma said. I left, Nneka replied. It's different from disappearing. Emeka had heard the car and was on the veranda with Chinedu on his hip. Amara appeared behind him, curious. Nneka went to meet her sister before the conversation got closer to the house. It wasn't conscious. It was instinct. The same instinct. She had to separate her problem from the problem of those she protected. Why did you come, Ifeoma? Because you disappeared without a word, and I got worried. You sent men to look for me. They were Obina's men. I didn't ask directly, but you allowed it. Ifeoma lowered her eyes. There was guilt there. Nneka recognized it. It wasn't the guilt of someone who didn't know. It was the guilt of someone who knew and had chosen to know less. Nneka, you need to come back. We can resolve things. Resolve what? The situation with Obina? If you talk to him, Ifeoma. Nneka said her sister's name with that firmness that isn't cruelty. It's a boundary. I told you what happened, not once. You chose not to believe. I respected that choice because it's your life, but I will not go back into that house while he is in it. You're exaggerating what happened. I know what happened to my own body. The silence was heavy. Ifeoma looked at the homestead, at the house, at Emeka standing on the veranda with the child in his arms. Are you living with this man? I work here. Nneka, you don't know him. I know him better than I knew the man who raised me. A pause. And he has never harmed me. That's a low bar. But it's a bar you seem to have forgotten exists. Ifeoma raised her eyes, and there was a wound there that Nneka recognized because she had the same wound on the other side. Obina said you took money. I took what was owed to me. He has documents that say otherwise. I have a witness that I arrived here with a small bag and nothing else. Ifeoma looked at her. You've always been stubborn, she said, and in that sentence was a mixture of admiration, frustration, and sadness that only a sister can produce. I learned from the same person you did, Neka said. Ifeoma stayed for another moment. Take care of yourself, she said finally. You too, Neka said. The car left, raising a fine dust in the hot air. Neka stood on the path for a while. Then she went back to the house. Emeka waited. He waited for her to wash her face, waited for her to sit, waited for her to be ready. That was your sister, he said. It was. Did she come on her own? Not entirely. She came because he sent her, but she also brought something that was hers. What? She thought. Guilt, she said, that she doesn't know what to do with. Emeka remained quiet. That man will keep trying. Probably. He'll change his strategy. Appearing himself is risky. He can be witnessed. Using my sister didn't work. She looked at her hands. He might try an institutional route, the theft story, which won't go anywhere because you arrived here with a small bag that Baba Dapo saw. Baba Dapo will confirm that? Baba Dapo already confirmed it when I asked. She looked at him. You asked Baba Dapo? I asked on the day he told me about the men at the shop. He said if anyone needed confirmation about the condition you arrived in, he would be available. Neka remained silent for a long moment. You did that without telling me, she said. I thought you would ask me if you needed to. I didn't want to alarm you earlier. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite classify, but there was something in it that was recognition. The kind of recognition that appears when someone does something good so quietly that you almost don't realize you are being cared for. Thank you, she said. You are welcome, he said. But there was something different in the way he said it this time. Less automatic, more present, Amara had asked. It was after dinner, Chinedu sleeping, Amara on the veranda bench while Neka combed her hair for the next day. Neka, do you like my papa? The question came with that childlike naturalness that doesn't know it's difficult. Neka continued combing. I do, she said. He is a good man. That's not what I'm asking. Neka paused. Do you know what you are asking? I do. I'm asking if you like him the way people like when they truly like someone. Neka was silent for a moment. Why do you ask? Because Papa looks at you when you're not looking, Amara said with the ruthless precision of a child who observes adults with scientific attention. And when he looks at you, his face changes. Not sad, different in another way. Neka finished combing, put in the elastic band, turned Amara to face her. She looked at that small face with the big eyes. When you grow up, Neka said, you will understand that some feelings need time to get a name. It's not that we hide them, it's that we are still learning what they are. But do you feel something? I feel something good. Something I don't quite know what it is yet, but it's good. Amara seemed completely satisfied with this. All right. When you find out the name, tell me. You'll be the first. Amara smiled, a smile that had something of Ada in it, and Neka felt it in her gut in a way that wasn't sadness. It was affection, which hurts a little because it's too big for the space you had reserved for it. Chief Obinna Ekweme appeared on a Monday. Emeka was on the veranda when the car stopped. He was not the type of man Emeka had imagined. He had imagined someone ostentatious, full of rings and loud voice. Chief Obinna Ekweme was the opposite. In his early 50s, well-groomed grey hair, discreet clothing that was expensive without appearing so, the kind of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself because it already has a well-known name to speak for itself. He was the most dangerous type. Good afternoon, Chief Obinna said, approaching the gate with that step of someone accustomed to entering anywhere. You must be Mr. Emeka Okoro. I am. My name is Chief Obinna Ekweme. I believe you know who I am. I do. Chief Obinna looked at the house with a quick assessment that said a lot about the kind of man he was. Is Neka here? She is. May I speak with her? I can ask if she wants to speak with you. Chief Obinna had the smile of someone who is being assessed and doesn't like it, but knows how to disguise it. Of course, Emeka called. Neka appeared at the door, saw Chief Obinna, and stood still with that vigilance of someone who recognizes a danger they know by scent. Chief Obinna climbed the 2 veranda steps uninvited. Neka, he said with the voice of someone trying to be reasonable for an audience. There's no need for all this drama. I came to talk like adults. I have no conversation with you, sir. You do. You left abruptly, taking. I know what I took. Then you know I have legal grounds to. You know what else? Emeka said. Both men looked at him. Emeka had remained still until this moment. He had let the dialogue happen because Neka was an adult and had the right to handle her own conversations. But a limit had been reached when Chief Obinna climbed the steps uninvited and began talking about legal rights on someone else's veranda. You are on my property, Emeka said, in a voice that wasn't loud, but had that firmness of someone completely resolute. This woman works here, and is under my roof. Any claim you have against her will have to go through me first, and I have a barrister hired. I have Baba Dapo as a witness to the state in which she arrived here, and I have zero patience for anyone who comes to my veranda with threats." Chief Obinna looked at him with that recalculation of someone revising the situation in real time. "I didn't come to threaten," he said, softer. "Then you can leave." Chief Obinna looked at Neka one last time. She stared back unflinching. He descended the steps before getting into his car. "You will regret making an enemy of my name, Okoro. I've received that warning before," Emeka said, from more convincing sources. The car left. Baba Dapo had come out of the shed during the conversation and stood in the compound, hand on the fence railing, watching. When the car disappeared, he spat on the ground with that expression of complete judgment that needed no words and went back to the shed. "Are you all right?" Emeka asked. "I am," Neka said. "He will try something else." "He will, but not here again. A man like him doesn't want to be seen where he can be witnessed." She stood looking at where the car had disappeared. "He'll look for another path. Then we'll keep an eye on the paths." She turned to him. "Why did you do that?" "What?" "Stood in front of me like that." He was silent for a moment. "Because it's right," he said. "You say that?" She said as if it were simple. "It is simple. For you, perhaps." He looked at her. "When you arrived here," he said, "with that bag and that request, I could have said no. I had enough reason to say no, but it was right to let you stay. Not because you asked me, but because it was what was right." He paused. "I just do that. What's right?" Neka looked at him, and there was something on her face that was being contained with effort, not tears. Something preceding tears, the moment when emotion decides whether to go or stay, and she was holding it back. "Thank you, Emeka," she said. And that name she said the way she said it, lingered in the air for a moment that neither of them filled. That night, in the notebook, Emeka wrote, "Ada, today I stood in front of someone to defend another person. I haven't done that since you. You know what it was? You know that when something matters to me, I stand in front. I'm no hero. It's just that I cannot act differently when I know what is right." He paused, stared at the page, and wrote more. "I am feeling things I don't yet know how to name. I won't pretend I'm not. But you always said that honesty is the bravest part of any person. So, I will be honest here, which is the safest place I have. I don't want her to leave. Not because I need help, but because the house feels different with her in it. And I feel different too." He closed it, stayed in the dark for a while, and slept better than he had in months. September arrived with the first rain of the season. A rain that started slowly, grew, settled, and when it settled, it stayed for good. The savannah responded with its specific speed, that speed that makes those unfamiliar with the vegetation think it's a miracle. One day it's dry and yellow, in 3 days it's green and lush. The cracked earth closed, the shallow stream filled, the pasture that had yellowed regained that color that nourishes both cattle and I. Chinedu turned 6 months old. On a Wednesday in September, Neka made maize cake with that deliberate simplicity of someone who knows that a celebration doesn't need pomp to be a celebration. Amara decorated the table with yellow wild bush flowers picked in the backyard early in the morning, the savanna flowers that appear with the first rain as if they had been waiting. "Where's Chinedu's spot?" Amara asked. "Chinedu sits on his little stool," Neka said, "but he needs his place marked on the table. So, mark it." Amara took one of the flowers and placed it in front of the small wooden stool Baba Dapo had made in the shed with that silent skill he had for wooden things. Emeka arrived from the pasture and stood at the kitchen entrance for a moment, the table adorned with simple flowers, the maize cake in the center. Amara arranging everyone's place with the seriousness of a hostess. Neka cutting the cake into equal slices with that attention of someone who does small things with the same care as big things. Chinedu on his stool, looking at the cake with the intense concentration of a baby who doesn't yet know what cake is, but knows it's something important. "Papa, are you waiting for an invitation?" Amara said. "I am not," he said and entered. The three of them sang "Happy Birthday," while Chinedu watched with that 6-month-old seriousness. Then they cut the cake. Then the four of them stayed there around the small kitchen table, with the rain on the zinc roof making that sound, which is the most homely sound in the world. And they ate in silence, which was not empty. It was full of the kind of silence that happens when people are together and don't need to fill the space with words for the space to make sense. Emeka looked at the three around the table and felt clearly and unambiguously that something had returned, not what had been. What had been was gone. Ada was gone. The life they had planned was gone. The veranda they were going to extend would not be extended in the same way for the same reason, but something had returned in another way. The feeling that the house had form, that the day had architecture, that there were people around the table who mattered, and that he mattered to them. That had returned, and it was enough. It wasn't everything he had wished for, but it was real. And sometimes real is more than enough. After the children were asleep, he went to the kitchen and found Neka washing the cake dishes. "Neka?" he said. She stopped. "There's something I need to say." She turned slowly, and there was something on Emeka's face that she had seen building over the months. The decision to be honest about something that is difficult to say, because saying it makes it real, and real has no turning back. "When you arrived here," he said, "I thought I needed help with the house and with the children, and that was true. But it wasn't just that." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think I needed someone who knew how to stay, not visit, not pass through, to truly stay with everything that implies." Another pause. "And you stayed." She remained quiet, listening. "I'm not telling you this to scare you, nor to create expectations," he continued. "I know you came from a situation that wasn't easy. I know there are still things not entirely resolved in your past, and I know I am still in a grief that hasn't ended." He looked at her directly. "But I needed to be honest. Because you taught me, unintentionally, that honesty at the right time is better than silence at the wrong time." She looked at him. There was a lot happening on her face. He saw it all. He saw the fear that wasn't his. It was the memory of other men who had come close and then exacted a price. He saw the affection she had tried to keep within a professional boundary that had slowly yielded, like a fence that doesn't withstand time. He saw the doubt of someone who learned to distrust good things, because good things in the past had a cost. "Emeka," she said in a voice lower than usual. "You don't need to answer now," he said. "I'm not asking for anything. I just said what was true." She remained silent for a long time. "I'm afraid," she said. "Me too." "It's not the same fear." "No," he agreed. "Your fear has a name and a face. Mine is more like the fear of trying again and not knowing if I can." A pause. "But both are real, and both are valid." She looked at her own hands. "I never had a place," she said slowly. "After my mother went, I went to their house because I had no choice. I worked, thinking it was gratitude, when in truth it was just the absence of an alternative." She raised her eyes. "When I arrived here, I was at my very end, literally. I can't say it differently. And I looked at you, at the baby, at Amara, and I thought, this is a place that needs someone who wants to stay." She paused again. "I asked to stay because it was the last thing I had to offer. Work and the will to stay. And you stayed," he said. "I stayed. And it wasn't just work," he said. She took a deep breath. "It wasn't just work," she admitted. They remained in silence for a moment that held the weight of many things. "I don't know what we are," she said. "I don't know if I know how to be what you would need." "I don't know either," he said. "But I know I don't want to pretend it doesn't exist." She looked at him for a long time. "Give me time," she said. "I have it," he said. And that was it. Without an embrace, without a gesture greater than words, he went back to his room. She finished washing the dishes, but there was something different in the air of the house that night. Something that wasn't declared, wasn't resolved, but was there, like when a seed has gone into the earth and hasn't sprouted yet, but is no longer just a seed. In the days that followed, nothing was said directly, but everything was different. It was the way he passed her in the kitchen, and there was a different space between their two bodies. No longer father, no longer closer, different from before. It was the way she sometimes said his name in the middle of a sentence, not on purpose, naturally, and the name lingered in the air in a way it hadn't before. It was Amara, observing all this with the eyes of a collector and, for once, saying nothing. Baba Dapo had said one morning to no one in particular, his back to the homestead, while fixing a part of the tractor, "A good homestead is a homestead that has people who stay," and he said nothing more, but he had said it. The news about Chief Obinna Ekweme arrived through Neka's cousin. Chike Okoro, a second cousin who had lost contact over the years, had managed to get Neka's number through an acquaintance in Elisha and called one October afternoon. He worked in a land registry office in Abuja. He had processed enough documentation over the last few years about Chief Obinna Ekweme's lands to know there were major irregularities, things that had attracted the attention of the EFCC, an ongoing investigation into illegal land acquisition in a protected area, irregular acquisition of public land. Chief Obinna Ekweme had much bigger problems than Neka, and a man with big problems doesn't keep small problems visible. Neka heard all this sitting in the kitchen chair, phone to her ear, her gaze fixed on the window, where Ada's mango tree swayed in the wind. When she hung up, She was silent for a while. Emeka had heard enough to understand. "It's not a victory," she said. "It doesn't have to be," he said. "It's just that he has a bigger problem now. Not that you won. Sometimes that's how we get free," he said. "Not because you won, but because what held you was caught by something else." She stood looking at the window. "I wish it were cleaner," she said. "That there was a moment when the truth was spoken and believed, and he was held accountable for what he did. Perhaps there still will be. Perhaps," she sighed. "But for now, the chase is over. So, for now, it's enough." She remained quiet. "Do you know what this means?" she said later. "Ah, what? That I can stay without running?" She looked at him. "Before, I stayed, but there was always the shadow that I might need to leave. Now I can truly stay, choosing." He looked at her. "And you choose?" he said. She looked at him for a long time. "I choose," she said. Amara turned 6 inches October with a chocolate cake Nneka made from scratch, with that special occasion care. Babadapo appeared with a rag doll he had made in the shed, from jute sackcloth dyed with onion skin, the eyes embroidered with black thread, wool hair, a doll that had the face of someone made with attention, and not in a hurry. Amara looked at the doll for a while. "You made it?" she asked Babadapo. "I made it with my hands, both of them." Amara looked at the doll and then at the old man and said, "Thank you, Babadapo." Babadapo put his cap back on and left without answering, because Babadapo was like that. But his shoulder had something different when he left. That lifted shoulder of someone trying not to show they were pleased. People from the surroundings came, Jide's son and his wife, Chidi's daughter. Children were running in the compound, low high-life music on the old kitchen radio, suya roasting on the wood fire stove, with that smell that goes through the air and tells everyone there's a party. In the middle of the afternoon, Amara pulled Nneka by the arm to the corner of the veranda. "I have something to tell you." "What?" Amara looked aside to make sure no one was listening. "This morning, I asked God for something for my birthday." "And what did you ask for?" "I asked him to let you stay forever." Nneka froze. "Nneka, I know you are not my mummy," the girl said with that maturity that shouldn't exist in a 6-year-old, but did. "My mummy went, and I know she went, but you are what we have now, and I don't want to lose anyone else we have." Nneka knelt in front of the girl and looked at that small face with Ada's eyes and Emeka's forehead, and the seriousness of someone who had lived more than her age should demand. She felt a love she hadn't asked for, hadn't planned, that had arrived slowly in an accumulation of mornings with cake flour and afternoons with plastic animals and nights of stories before sleep, and which was now as real as anything she had ever felt. "I don't want to go anywhere either," Nneka said. Amara's smile filled her whole face, and she ran off. Nneka remained crouched for a moment, looking at where the girl had disappeared into the party. When she stood up, Emeka was behind her. He had heard. He said nothing. He raised his hand and lightly touched her face, his calloused farmwork palm resting for a second on her face like a question and an answer at the same time. She closed her eyes and remained like that for that entire second, receiving that simple gesture that, of all the things that had happened since she had arrived at the gate with the small bag, felt most like home. November arrived with the savannah completely green. Ada's mango tree had grown another palm's length. Emeka measured it with the ruler he kept in the shed for that purpose. He made the mark on the trunk below the previous ones. He looked at the tree for a moment. Nneka was beside him with Chinedu on her hip, the boy trying to reach the lower leaves with his short hand. "It will be big," Nneka said. "It will," he said. "A mango tree takes time, perhaps 10 years for it to give real shade." 10 years, Nneka said. "It's a long time. It's enough time for many things," she said. And there was something in that that wasn't just about the tree. He looked at her. She looked at him. Chinedu let out an enthusiastic cry, which had no specific reason beyond being a 7-month-old baby on a sunny day, and they both laughed at the same time, without planning that involuntary laughter that happens when something innocent arrives at an exact moment. On a November night, sitting on the veranda after the children were asleep, with the sky full of stars that the rain had left clean, Nneka said, "May I ask you something?" "You may. Would you let me stay, even if I wasn't necessary? Even if you found someone else to take care of the house and the children?" He was silent for a moment. "Is that a real question?" he said. "It is." "Why do you ask?" "Because I want to know if I stay because I am useful or because I am cherished." Emeka looked at the sky. "You arrived here being useful," he said after a while. "You stayed being necessary." A pause. "But now it's no longer about what you do. It's about who you are." He looked at her. "And that answer doesn't change if I hire 10 women to take care of the house." Nneka was silent for a long moment. "That's the best thing anyone has ever said to me," she said in a low voice. Why? Because in my whole life, I've always been useful before being cherished. A pause. You said the opposite. Emeka extended his hand over the arm of the chair and left it there. Not grasping, not asking, just present. Nneka looked at that hand for a moment and placed hers on top, and they remained like that on the veranda, with the stars and the savannah and the November wind, both in silence, which was the fullest kind that exists. In March of the following year, Amara was the first to see. She woke up very early before everyone else and went to the backyard, still in her pajamas, slippers, with disheveled hair, and suddenly screamed in a way that made Emeka sit up in bed, thinking something had happened. Papa, Nneka, come and see. Emeka went. Nneka went with Chinedu in her arms, who had woken up with the scream. Ada's mango tree had burst into white blossoms during the early morning. It was covered in white, that white of mango flowers that has a sweet and light scent, and which means the fruit will come later, that the waiting is over, that what was promised will be fulfilled. Amara stood in front of the tree, her arms open to the sides, for no specific reason, just because the moment called for a gesture greater than a still body. Look, she said, it has blossomed. Blossomed? Emeka said. Chinedu stretched out his hand towards the flowers, as he had done with the leaves, with that constant curiosity of almost 1 year in the world. Nneka stood looking at the tree. There was something in that moment that she didn't have enough words to name. There was the mango tree that had been planted by a woman who was no longer there to see. There was the child who had screamed to call everyone as if the good thing wasn't worth it if it wasn't shared. There was the man who was beside her looking at the tree with that expression of someone who is seeing two things at the same time, the past and the present, and is learning to fit into both. And there was her, Nneka Okoro, who had arrived at a gate with a small bag and a single request, and who was now standing here under a blossoming mango tree with a baby in her arms, who had learned to call her with a full mouth, and a girl who had asked God for her to stay. There was her who had stayed. Emeka looked at her. She looked at him. Thank you, she said in a very low voice, in a tone that wasn't for the present situation. It was for everything. For the open gate, for the time he had given, for the hand extended on the veranda, for his face placed in front of whoever had threatened, for every morning of ready coffee and every night of shared silence. He understood all this. You are welcome, he said in the same way she had said it to him before, not as an automatic phrase, but as a real answer. Amara came and stood between the two of them, one side to each, without asking permission, because children don't ask permission to occupy the space between the people they love. And there they stood, the four of them, under Ada's blossoming mango tree, in early March, with the green savannah all around and the wet earth, and the sun slowly rising over Ogbomosho homestead. It had started with a simple request. It had become a family, not in the planned way, not in the way either of them had imagined for their own lives, but in the only way true things become, slowly, without warning, by the strength of people who stayed when they could have left. And this kind of thing, when it happens, doesn't need a different name. It just needs people who have the courage to let it be. The end. A story of losses that opened up space, of a woman who arrived with almost nothing and ended up with everything that matters, of a man who learned that sometimes what life sends isn't what we asked for, but it's exactly what we need. If you stayed from beginning to end, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your presence is what makes this channel exist. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now. It's a click that costs nothing and means everything to those who do this work with such care. Leave a like. It tells the channel that the story was worth it. Activate the notification bell, because a new story is coming soon, and you won't want to miss it. And comment below where you are watching this video from. City, state, country, tell me. And if any character touched your heart in a special way, tell me that too. Until the next story.